She was the most beautiful princess in Europe, the woman whose face sold magazines, whose style was copied by millions, who married into the British royal family in a wedding watched by the whole world. For a few short years, Princess Marina seemed to have everything: beauty, love, glamour, and 3 perfect children born into a palace. And then, on a grey morning in August of 1942, a knock came at the door. Her husband, a prince, a son of a king, had boarded a military aircraft on a wartime mission to Iceland. The plane never reached its destination. It slammed into a hillside in the north of Scotland and burst into flames. There were almost no survivors, and in an instant, the most envied woman in Britain became a 35-year-old widow. But here is the part that turns this from a tragedy into something almost unbearable. Because in the nursery, just down the hall, lay her 3rd child, a baby boy. He was 7 weeks old. 7 weeks. His father had held him only a handful of times, and now that father was gone forever, killed in a war, leaving Marina alone with 3 small children, the youngest still in her arms, and a future that had just been ripped to pieces. The world remembers Princess Marina as a style icon, the elegant, glamorous Duchess in the designer gowns. What the world forgot is what came after the cameras looked away. A young widow, grieving in the middle of a world war, who made a quiet decision that would define the rest of her life. She would not let her grief destroy her children. Whatever it cost her, and it would cost her nearly everything, she would get those 3 children through it. Her name was Princess Marina, Duchess of Kent. This is the story of the 3 children she fought to save, the husband she lost in a flash of fire on a Scottish hillside, and the price a mother pays to hold a family together when the world has fallen apart. And to understand what she saved them from, you first have to understand the dazzling, fragile world they were born into. To understand Princess Marina, you have to understand that she was born royal twice over, and that even royalty could not protect her from loss. She came into the world on the 13th of December 1906 as Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark. Her father was a Greek prince, her mother a Russian Grand Duchess, and through her veins ran the blood of some of the oldest royal houses in Europe. She was, by birth, a member of that vanishing world of European royalty that existed before the great wars swept so much of it away. She grew up surrounded by palaces, princes, and the glittering certainty that she belonged to the highest rank of human society. But that world was already cracking beneath her feet. Because Marina was born into a Greek royal family that politics would soon force into exile. As a child, she experienced the instability of a monarchy under threat, the upheavals, the loss of position, the periods of living abroad, away from the throne her family was tied to. Even a princess, she learned early, could have the ground pulled out from under her. The grandeur was real, but so was its fragility. That lesson, that everything beautiful can be taken away, was woven into Marina's life from the very beginning. And yet, what everyone noticed about Marina was not her troubles, it was her beauty. As she grew into a young woman, Princess Marina became famous across Europe as one of the most stunning royals of her generation, dark-haired, elegant, with a natural grace and an instinct for style that would one day make her a global fashion icon. She was poised, cultured, fluent in several languages, the very picture of European royal refinement. She was the kind of princess the world dreams about. And in the early 1930s, that beauty and that bloodline drew the attention of one of the most glamorous bachelors in the world, a prince of the British royal family. His name was Prince George. He was a son of King George V of Great Britain, which made him the brother of 2 future kings, the man who would briefly become Edward VIII, and the man who would become King George VI, father of Queen Elizabeth II. Prince George was handsome, charming, sophisticated, and cultured, a lover of art and music and beautiful things, widely considered the most artistic and stylish of the royal brothers. On the surface, he was the perfect match for the beautiful Greek princess. But beneath that polished surface, Prince George carried shadows of his own. In his younger years, before he met Marina, he had lived a wild and troubled life. He had struggled with serious personal demons, including by many accounts, a battle with drug addiction that the family worked desperately to keep hidden from the public. He had moved through a fast, glamorous, sometimes reckless world. The dashing prince the public adored had a private history far darker and more complicated than anyone outside the palace walls was allowed to know. And this is the first hint of the central truth of this story, that the gleaming royal facade almost always hides something more fragile underneath. Prince George had, by the time he met Marina, worked to put his troubled past behind him, and many believed that Marina herself was a steadying force in his life, that the love of this elegant, grounded princess helped him become the man he was meant to be. In 1934, Prince George married Princess Marina in a spectacular ceremony at Westminster Abbey. It was one of the great royal weddings of the age, a beautiful foreign princess marrying a beloved British prince, watched and celebrated around the world. He was given the title Duke of Kent. She became Marina, Duchess of Kent. And together, this dazzling, stylish modern couple became darlings of the public, photographed everywhere, admired for their elegance, held up as a kind of royal fairy tale come to life. And then came the children, and for a few precious years, the fairy tale seemed entirely real. Their first child arrived on the 9th of October 1935, a son, Prince Edward of Kent. A little over a year later, on Christmas Day of 1936, came a daughter, Princess Alexandra, a baby girl born on Christmas, like a gift. The young Kent family was beautiful, fashionable, and growing, living a charmed life at the heart of the British royal world. Two perfect children, a glamorous marriage, a prince and a princess, adored by millions. This was the gilded facade at its most golden. A handsome prince who had overcome his past. A beautiful princess who had helped him do it. Two lovely children in a sunny nursery. A family that seemed to embody everything wonderful about royal life. But the world was darkening around them. By the late 1930s, the shadow of war was falling across Europe, and when the Second World War finally came, it would not spare even the royal family. It would, in time, reach into that beautiful nursery and take from those children the one thing no title and no fortune could ever give back. The fairy tale had a clock on it, and it was already running out. When the Second World War broke out in 1939, the British royal family did something that earned them the lasting devotion of their people. They stayed. They did not flee to safety. They remained in Britain through the bombing, sharing in the danger, and the royal men took on active wartime duties, and Prince George, Duke of Kent, threw himself into the war effort. He joined the Royal Air Force, taking on the rank of Air Commodore, and serving in a role connected to the welfare of RAF personnel. This was not a man hiding behind his title. The Duke of Kent was an active serving member of the armed forces in a nation fighting for its survival, traveling, inspecting, carrying out his duties in the most dangerous years his country had ever known. The glamorous, artistic prince had become a man in uniform, doing his part in a global war, and in the middle of that war, against that backdrop of fear and uncertainty, Marina and George welcomed their third child. On the 4th of July 1942, Princess Marina gave birth to a second son, Prince Michael of Kent. Now the family was complete. Edward, nearly 7 years old, Alexandra, 5, and the new baby, Michael. 3 children, the youngest just born into a world at war, but safe, it seemed, in the arms of loving parents. The baby was just weeks old. The family was whole. And then, in a matter of days, everything they had was destroyed. In late August of 1942, Prince George prepared to fly to Iceland on official wartime duties, a mission connected to his RAF service. On the 25th of August 1942, he boarded a Royal Air Force flying boat, a large military aircraft, along with its crew, and they took off from the north of Scotland, heading out over the rugged Scottish Highlands. They had been in the air only a short time when catastrophe struck. In poor conditions, the aircraft slammed into a hillside in a remote area of the Scottish Highlands and exploded. The crash was almost completely unsurvivable. Of the 15 people aboard, 14 were killed, and among the dead was Prince George, Duke of Kent. He was just 39 years old. The news that reached Princess Marina was the news that every wife of every serviceman in that war lived in terror of hearing. Her husband was dead, killed in service. His aircraft had gone down, and he was not coming home. But pause and absorb the full weight of the timing, because it is almost too cruel to comprehend. Their baby son, Michael, had been born on the 4th of July. His father died on the 25th of August. That is a span of just 7 weeks. Prince George died when his youngest child was less than 2 months old, an infant who would grow up with no memory of his father at all, who would know him only through photographs and the stories of others. In fact, the loss was so fresh and so devastating that it touched even the baby's beginning. The child had only just been born into the family, and now that family had been shattered before he could even hold his head up. And there is one more heartbreaking detail. Prince George was, by the accounts of those close to the family, a devoted and loving father. The shadows of his troubled youth were behind him. He had become a man who adored his wife and his children. The war had not just taken a prince, it had taken a father who loved his children, and it had taken him at the very moment a new little life had joined them. So picture Princess Marina in those days. She was 35 years old. She had 3 children, a boy of nearly 7, a girl of 5, and a newborn of 7 weeks. She was a foreign-born princess, her own family long since displaced from the Greek throne, living in a country that was fighting for its very existence, the bombs still falling, the outcome of the war still terrifyingly uncertain. And the man she loved, the father of her children, the anchor of her entire world, was gone. Killed in an instant on a Scottish hillside, his body brought home for a nation in mourning to bury. The glamorous Duchess, the style icon, the fairy tale princess, in a single moment, all of that was stripped away, and what remained was simply a grieving young widow with 3 children who needed her, and a grief vast enough to swallow her whole. This was the first crack, but it was a crack like an earthquake, splitting the family's entire world in 2. There was the life before the 25th of August, 1942, and the life after. And in the life after, everything depended on one question. What would this devastated young mother do now? Would she collapse beneath a grief that would have crushed almost anyone? Or would she find, somewhere inside herself, the strength to do the one thing that mattered more than her own broken heart, to protect the 3 small children who had just lost their father, and who now had only her? The answer to that question would define the rest of Marina's life, and it would determine the fate of 3 royal children who, on that August day, became something none of them had ever expected to be, the fatherless children of a widowed princess, in the middle of the deadliest war the world had ever known. In the weeks after Prince George's death, Princess Marina disappeared into a grief so total that those around her feared for her. She had lost the love of her life with no warning, in the middle of a war, with a newborn in her arms. The nation mourned a prince, but Marina mourned a husband, and the difference between those 2 kinds of grief is the difference between a headline and a wound. And here is where the true collapse of this story begins. Because the world's attention, by its nature, moves on. The funeral ends. The newspapers find new tragedies in a war full of them. The public sympathy, however genuine, fades. But for the widow left behind, the hardest part is only just beginning. The long, quiet, unwitnessed years of actually living without the person who is gone. The cameras that had followed the glamorous Kent family for years now looked elsewhere. And in the silence they left behind, Princess Marina was alone with 3 children and an ocean of grief. She was, in those first terrible months, a young woman utterly transformed. The vibrant, stylish Duchess became, for a time, a figure of deep mourning, dressed in black, withdrawn into her sorrow. Those close to her worried she might not recover from the blow at all. To lose a husband is devastating at any age. To lose him at 35, suddenly, violently, with a 7-week-old baby and 2 other small children depending on you, in a country at war, it is the kind of loss that can break a person permanently. But Marina had 3 children, and that, in the end, is what saved her, and what she, in turn, used to save them. Because somewhere in that darkness, Princess Marina made a decision. She could not bring George back. She could not undo the crash on the Scottish hillside. But she could refuse to let her grief take her children's mother, as well as their father. She would not let them grow up in the shadow of a broken, absent, collapsed parent. She had lost her husband. She would not let her children lose her too. And so, slowly, painfully, she began to climb back out of the abyss. Not for herself, but for them. This is the quiet heroism at the center of Marina's story, and it is the part the glossy fashion retrospectives always leave out. The strength it took to get up every morning, for 3 children, when the person you most wanted to see was never coming home again. The performance of stability for the sake of the young, while privately carrying a grief that never fully healed. Marina became, in those years, both mother and father to Edward, Alexandra, and Michael, the sole source of their security in a world that had proven how quickly security can vanish. And it was not only emotional weight she carried, it was practical, grinding hardship too. Because here is a truth that surprises people about royalty. A royal title does not always come with limitless money. After George's death, Marina found herself in genuinely difficult financial circumstances. Her husband was gone, and with him a great deal of the family's standing and income. She faced the very real challenge of maintaining a household, raising 3 children to the standard expected of royalty, and keeping up appearances, all on dramatically reduced means, in the austere years during and after the war. The pressure was real enough that Princess Marina did something that quietly stunned the royal world. In the years after George's death, she was forced to sell some of her possessions, including pieces of jewelry and personal effects, to help manage the financial strain. Think about what that represents. The most glamorous princess in Europe, the woman whose style the whole world copied, quietly parting with her treasures to keep her family afloat. There was no public complaint, no display of self-pity. She simply did what had to be done, with dignity, to protect her children's world. And through all of it, she went back to work. The work of royalty. Rather than retreating permanently into private grief, Marina gradually returned to public life and took on a heavy load of royal duties. She became a hard-working, dedicated member of the royal family, supporting countless charities and organizations, representing the crown at home and abroad, carrying out the endless rounds of engagements that royal service demands. She poured herself into duty, partly because it was expected, partly, perhaps, because work is one of the few things that can hold a grieving heart together. The widow did not hide. She served. But never forget what was happening underneath that public service. Every official engagement, every charity visit, every dignified public appearance, all of it was being done by a woman who went home to a house without her husband, to raise 3 children without their father. The elegant figure the public saw was carrying a private weight the public never imagined. She had become a master of the very thing this entire story is about. The gilded facade. The graceful, composed princess on the outside. The grieving, struggling, exhausted single mother within. And the children grew. That was the reward, and the reason, for all of it. Edward, the eldest, grew into his role as the young Duke of Kent. Alexandra blossomed into a poised young princess. And little Michael, the baby who had never known his father, grew from an infant into a boy, into a young man, raised entirely by the mother who had refused to let her grief swallow them. Whatever Marina suffered privately, she succeeded at the thing that mattered most. She gave her 3 children a childhood. Difficult, yes. Marked by loss, certainly. But stable. Loved. Whole enough to grow up strong. That was Marina's great, quiet victory in the years of collapse. She had been handed a catastrophe that could have destroyed 4 lives. Instead, through sheer will and love and dignity, she absorbed the worst of it herself and shielded her children from being destroyed by it. But the story was not finished taking from this family, because Marina, who had given everything to get her children safely to adulthood, would face one more cruel turn, and this time, it would be her children who had to find the strength. As the years passed and her children moved into adulthood, Princess Marina entered a calmer, more settled chapter of her life. The rawest grief had softened with time, as it does, into something quieter, a permanent absence she had learned to live alongside. She never remarried. She remained, for the rest of her life, the widow of the Duke of Kent, devoted to his memory and to the family they had built together in their too few years. And she had the deep satisfaction of watching her children flourish, the ultimate proof that her sacrifice had been worth it. She saw her eldest son, Edward, take on his full responsibilities as Duke of Kent, marry, and begin a family of his own. She saw her daughter, Princess Alexandra, grow into one of the most popular and admired members of the royal family, and in 1963, Marina had the joy of watching Alexandra marry in a beautiful, celebrated royal wedding. She saw her youngest, Michael, the baby who had lost his father at 7 weeks old, grow into a young man, his father's son, in ways George never lived to see. The 3 small children she had shielded from catastrophe had become accomplished, dignified adults, taking their places in the royal family with the grace their mother had taught them. For Marina, this was everything. This was the meaning of all those hard years. The widow who had nearly drowned in grief had not only survived, she had raised 3 royal children who were now thriving. Whatever the cost to her own heart, she had won the only battle that had ever truly mattered to her. In her later years, Princess Marina remained a beloved and elegant figure, still admired for the style and grace that had made her famous decades earlier. She was a grandmother now, a senior royal, a woman who had earned her place through service and survived more than most people ever know. She had come through the fire of 1942 and built something lasting on the other side of it. But in the 1960s, a new shadow fell. Princess Marina became ill, and it was the kind of illness that does not relent. She was diagnosed with a brain tumor, an inoperable, malignant brain tumor. The woman who had survived the sudden violent loss of her husband now faced a slower, Tleikenus journey, crueler enemy, a disease that would take her by degrees. And once again, this family found itself gathered around a deathbed instead of a celebration. On the 27th of August, 1968, Princess Marina, Duchess of Kent, died at her home, Kensington Palace, with her family around her. She was 61 years old, and there is a haunting detail in the timing that echoes through this whole story. She died on the 27th of August, almost exactly 26 years, to the very end of the month, after her husband George had died on the 25th of August, 1942. The 2 great deaths that bookended her adult life fell in the same last week of the same month, a quarter of a century apart. The war had taken her husband in late August. Cancer took her in late August, as if the calendar itself remembered. Now turn your attention to the 3 children, because this is where their fate truly comes into focus, and where the meaning of everything Marina did becomes clear. When their mother died in 1968, Edward, Alexandra, and Michael were no longer the small, vulnerable children of 1942. They were grown adults, strong, established, capable. Edward was a man in his 30s, a husband and father, the Duke of Kent in full. Alexandra was a celebrated wife and royal in her own right. Michael was a young man of 26, finding his own path. They grieved their mother deeply. They had been extraordinarily close to her, bound together by the loss they had all survived together. But they grieved her as whole, healthy, functioning adults. They did not collapse. They did not unravel. They carried their grief with the same dignity their mother had carried hers. And that, precisely that, is the secret fate of Princess Marina's 3 children. Because their story could so easily have been a tragedy. 3 children who lost their father to war, one of them just 7 weeks old. By every statistic, by every grim expectation, children who suffer a loss like that, who grow up under that kind of shadow, are at terrible risk. We have seen in other stories how a single catastrophe in childhood can echo down through a whole life, can break people decades later. The children of trauma so often inherit the damage. But Edward, Alexandra, and Michael did not. They grew up steady. They grew up whole. They grew up to live long, productive, dignified lives of royal service. Their fate was not tragedy at all. Their fate was survival, and stability, and strength. And that did not happen by accident. It happened because of a choice their mother made in the darkest hour of her life. When Marina decided, in the depths of her grief, that she would not let her loss destroy her children, when she climbed out of the abyss for their sake, sold her jewels to keep their world intact, became both mother and father to them, and shielded them from the full weight of the catastrophe. She was writing the fate of her 3 children with her own hands. She took the blow so they wouldn't have to. She absorbed the tragedy so they could have a future. That is what "she saved her 3 children" truly means. Not from a single dramatic moment, but across 26 years of quiet, daily, invisible sacrifice. She lost her husband, she lost her treasures, she lost the carefree, glamorous life she was supposed to have. But she saved the 3 people who mattered most. And there is one final truth in this story, a revelation about what really happened to those 3 children in the long years after their mother was gone, and what it tells us about the difference one parent's love can make. Because the proof of Marina's victory is not in how her children grieved in 1968, it is in how they lived for the next half-century. For most of this story, we have measured Princess Marina by what she lost. The husband killed in the war. The fairy tale marriage cut short after only 8 years. The treasures sold to make ends meet. The glamorous life that grief and duty replaced. Measured by loss, Marina's life can look like one long tragedy. The beautiful princess who had everything, and then had it all taken away. But here is the revelation that reframes everything you've just heard. Because we have been watching the wrong thing the entire time. We have been watching what Marina lost. We should have been watching what she built. Look at what actually became of the 3 children she fought so hard to save. Not in the months after her death, but across the decades. Because the proof of a parent's work is never in the moment. It is in the lifetime that follows. Her eldest, Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent, did not just survive. He became one of the most steadfast, hard-working, and enduring members of the entire British royal family, serving the crown faithfully for decade after decade, well into his old age. Her daughter, Princess Alexandra, became one of the most beloved royals of her generation, admired for her warmth and her tireless service, a fixture of British public life for more than half a century. And her youngest, Prince Michael of Kent, the baby who never knew his father, the 7-week-old infant left fatherless on a Scottish hillside, grew into a respected royal who built a full and accomplished life, the living embodiment of everything his mother refused to let that tragedy take from him. 3 children who lost their father to war. 3 children a widowed mother raised alone through grief and hardship. And every one of them grew up to live a long, stable, dignified life of service. Not one of them was destroyed by the catastrophe of 1942. Not one of them inherited ruin. They inherited, instead, the strength their mother poured into them. That is Princess Marina's true legacy. Not the gowns, not the famous beauty, not the fashion that made her an icon. Her real legacy is 3 human beings who became some of the most enduring figures in the royal family's modern history, and who carried, in the steadiness of their long lives, the invisible fingerprints of a mother who had decided, in her darkest hour, that her grief would end with her and not pass on to them. This is the thing the world so easily misses about a woman like Marina. The history books file her under style icon and tragic young widow. But the most important work of her life was not glamorous and was never photographed. It happened in the nursery, in the quiet, in the daily choice to be strong for 3 children who needed her. The fashion made her famous, but raising those 3 children through the unsurvivable, that is what made her great. That is the secret fate of Princess Marina's 3 children. Not tragedy, survival, not ruin, resilience. 3 lives that should, by every grim expectation, have been broken by what happened to them, and that instead became proof of what a single, determined, loving parent can save a child from, even when she cannot save herself from her own grief. So let's return to where we began. A 7-week-old baby in a nursery, and a 35-year-old woman who had just been told her husband was never coming home. We started this story bracing for tragedy, the tragic fate of 3 children who lost their father to war. And here is the truth that changes everything. The tragedy we expected never came for those children, because their mother stepped in front of it. The fate that should have been theirs, the broken, haunted, damaged life that so often follows a childhood catastrophe like that. Marina took it onto herself instead. She carried the grief so they wouldn't have to. She absorbed the loss so they could have a future. And the proof is the long, steady, dignified lives all three of them went on to live. The fate of her three children was not tragedy, it was rescue. And the rescuer was their mother. There is a lesson buried in Princess Marina's life for every one of us. We live in a world that celebrates the visible things, the beauty, the glamour, the achievements you can photograph. Marina was famous for all of those. But the most important thing she ever did was invisible. It was the quiet, unglamorous, unwitnessed work of holding three children steady through the worst thing that ever happened to them, when she herself was breaking inside. No one gave her an award for it, no magazine put it on the cover, but it mattered more than everything she was famous for, combined. And maybe that is the truest thing this story can leave you with. The most important work any of us ever does is almost never the work the world sees. It is the strength we summon for the people who depend on us, on the days we have nothing left. It is choosing, in our own darkest hour, to be the shelter for someone smaller than us. Marina lost her husband, her wealth, and the carefree life she was promised. But she saved the three people who mattered most, and in doing so, she turned what could have been a story of 4 ruined lives into a story of one woman's love holding a family together against everything the world threw at it. So here is what her story asks of you. Think of the person who once stood between you and the worst of the world. The parent, the grandparent, the someone who carried a weight you never even saw so that you could grow up safe. And if they are still here, tell them you understand now. Because the people who save us rarely get to hear that we noticed. Marina's children noticed. They spent their long lives proving it. Behind every famous face is a private act of courage the world never recorded. And the truest stories are almost always the ones hiding just behind the glamour, waiting for someone to finally tell them.